welcome to another episode of Aquarian Light. Today's episode is called Adapting to Aquarius. Many people move through life making decisions, following impulses, various desires, completely unaware of the forces and energies at play that are impacting, directing, and having a hand in these daily experiences. These energies can affect an individual, they can affect a group, like a school, a company, they can affect a nation, a society, a civilization. For those who are in the studies of the occult, of esotericism, for those who seek to walk a spiritual path, for those who seek to move in a more conscious manner, then it behooves them to take note of, to study, and to become aware of and work with these energies, these forces, these laws of the reality or of nature. The problem is when we're unconscious and we're not aware of these forces at work, then there can be many energies that are directing a particular movement. And without the awareness to perceive and to move in a harmonized manner, then we may not be responding in the most effective or useful way. We may not be hearing the voice of Source. We may not be following these particular movements of energy. So let's go back to the Age of Aquarius. What does that actually mean?
Yes. Let's talk about first, before we get more into the topic, let's give a little bit of context on what exactly is an astrological age and how does that relate to the planet and to us. I'm sure most people are familiar at least with a birth chart or the zodiacal year that is related to the constellations and the perspective of how our planet passes through those in one trip around the sun. In a sense, we could say that our solar system and our planet also is orbiting around a central point, the star Alcyone, the center of the Pleiades, and that the solar system itself too is also moving around its own zodiacal year. For our star system, for our planet, one trip around the zodiacal belt in the Pleiades takes around, I believe, 24,500 years, something like that. And each month, each space that it passes between one of the zodiac symbols, the constellations, is around 2,200 years or so.
So there's a larger wheel that's longer, and then there's a smaller one inside of it?
Yes. So in that sense, the same energies that affect us also affect the planet on a more macro sense. There's cycles within cycles. And when we look even in the course of, say, a single day, we go through these same energies. And actually, when we talk about the 12 energies of the zodiac, it's not so much the energy that actually comes from the stars, but it's actually related to the four elements that we think of in antiquity in the spiritual sense: fire, earth, water, and air. And those elements manifested through the three creative forces that we've talked about before on the podcast, in the sense of that there's a positive, a negative, and a neutral force that everything expresses through. And really, these energies aren't so much related to the constellations as they are related to the four cardinal points and where these energies come from. A good example of why this is and how this is, for example, for us, we are on Earth. So our perspective of the constellations and what energies come from each of these constellations is relative to our location. But it's not like we could say Leo which is related to the element of fire. If we were on the other side of Leo in another galaxy, and we still saw that constellation, or let's say another solar system, galaxies far away, probably would have different constellations. But if we saw Leo from the other side, let's say we were in a star system on the other side of Leo, then perhaps Leo would be air to us, because the radiation doesn't come from the actual stars of the constellations. This is just how we relate to them, and based on our position. So the energies are just these natural energies that come from, we could say, fire is related to the north and is the projecting energy that comes from the center of, in the cosmic sense, we could say the center of our galaxy, but also everything that has a central point and energy that projects out from it, that energy would be related to the energy of fire. So you could say that front facing from us, when we're projecting our energy forward, we would be facing fire as well. So
or fire is coming out.
Fire is
of us,
coming from us moving forward.
Then what's behind?
On the planet and in the physical, it's Earth, but I believe actually in the cosmos, the element that's opposite of fire is air.
Okay.
But that's not necessarily. I just wanted to mention the North Star, or the northern point, in the sense, because it will be relative to what we're going to talk about a little bit later, and that the North Star, it is something that we relate to our own center point. So we each have our own center point, and it's the energy that projects out from our center forward, or from any body center forward, from the galaxy, from the universe, from the planet, that would normally be related to the element of, it would be related to fire. So it would be coming from the north and moving in a southward direction. That energy would radiate. Now, in our system, that northern point is related to Leo, and across from that is Aquarius. So when we look at the structure of these energies, we have the energy of, we have two important periods in the cycle of the zodiacal year, or the sidereal year of the solar system when it goes around the zodiac. And that is Leo, the age of Leo, which was about 12,500 years ago, right in the middle of that year, where most signs point to the great deluge that we see in most mythological texts, but also we can see in the sediment of the planet and things of that nature, that there was a flooding event, and esoterically speaking, we would say was when the last civilization, or the last root race of Atlantis, was submerged, and then a new race came out of that after that cataclysm, those that survived, being our race.
So the cataclysm is related to the cycles?
Yes, we could say that when you come around towards one of these points, whether you're at the energy of at the point of where the energy is strongest, or directly at the opposite end when you've moved furthest away from it and are now receiving that energy again for the first time, there's a significant change in the collective consciousness. Right. And we'll explore that a little bit later too. But there's a little bit more things that we just need to differentiate between what most people are familiar with, which is the zodiac in the sense of the zodiacal year and their birth chart, and the sidereal year that is related to the ages. One thing is that when we think of Earth going around the sun and how we pass through the zodiac, we move in a direction that goes, say, we started the spring. At the beginning of the year, we have Aries and Taurus and Gemini. That's because that's the direction that our Earth rotates around the sun. It passes through the zodiac in that manner. If we pull back, however, our solar system is moving actually in the inverse direction around Alcyone. So the ages move in an inverse direction from that, whereas the age we just came from is the age of Pisces, and we're moving into the age of Aquarius. Another important theme that will be important for what we're speaking about today is that when we move from one energy to another, it's not a hard point or a hard transition. There's actually a transitional phase. Those who are maybe a little familiar with their natal chart astrology, you would know that if you were born, for example, within 3 days of a point of change in the zodiac sign, that you would be considered to be born on the cusp, and you actually have energies of both. Actually, I have this in my experience as well, that I was born 2 days after the change from Gemini into Cancer. So you could say that my natal chart had influences of both of those forces at the time of my birth. Both Gemini and Cancer were both expressing at that time. The same is true for zodiacal years, where we could say the Age of Aquarius started in 1962, but there's a transitional phase between when the energy of Pisces will fully stop expressing, and that will move into a period where Aquarius expresses fully and totally. And this can be seen in the sense that both before the Age of Aquarius started, we already started to see changes moving towards new energies of Aquarius, in the sense of both in the spiritual sense and esotericism and spirituality having new movements, and also the technological advances society takes. Aquarius is ruled by Uranus. So this is a very, both the revelations, both in a practical way and a spiritual way, tend to come along with the energy of that. And those changes started happening as before 1962. It happened more around the early 1700s, 1800s, and then it drew into the age we're in now, and now it's starting to pick up steam, and the older energies of the Piscean age are slowly drawing back, but they're still there, and there's still attachments to them.
So what are some of the signs of this new age? Like you said, there's technology. What else is it? Like when in 1962, the Age of Aquarius started, what would we say are all the markers that the collective was starting to even unconsciously feel this energy?
Well, the thing is that Aquarius is a water bringer. It pours out the waters of the spirit, and in that sense, it's a time of revelation, and revelation can be in twofold, right? All these energies can be expressed through a dualistic nature, just like everything can be expressed in a positive, negative way, and then have a point of balance. For Aquarius, the plus minus is very similar to the planet that rules it, which is Uranus, but it's either everything must be revealed, everything must come out. So in the sense of spirituality, in a spiritual sense, introspective, reflective sense, we see the mysteries being revealed out to the public. Everything is coming out. Things that were hidden and kept secret, there aren't really any secrets anymore. It's an era of information. And that's also reflected in a practical sense and in the general population. So technology has boomed since, we could say, because of World War II and all these things, but also that lines with the years, that's a manifestation of that. The technology has boomed since like the 40s, 50s, 60s till now. We could also say that information and communication is at an all-time peak that it ever was for the civilization. Things like the internet, social media, all of these things, it's an era of information. We could even say at this point, it's an era of misinformation as well, because it's so easy to put things out and to trick people. But all of these things from a neutral perspective, not saying if it's good or bad or for the better or worse, things like AI, all of this stuff that's coming along, all are reflections of the energy of Aquarius, both on a practical level in a physical sense, and also in a spiritual sense when we look at the spiritual movements that are going on the planet.
Right, I see. So that's very interesting. Definitely, even though the vast majority, we could say, are not awakened, they're reacting to these energies in some shape or form. You mentioned the cusp. How does this play into it?
Yeah, so whenever we're transitioning through forms of energy is always moving and is fluid. So it's not like it's just like, there's a piece here in separation, a piece here in separation, and this just stops and this begins.
It's like an overlap.
Yeah. So there's just the energy slowly flows from one into the other. The coming energy starts to express earlier than its actual starting point, and then starts to grow. And then we could say at the the point and where the actual age starts is probably about 50-50 rather than it being the actual beginning of the age. And then slowly as you move more and more into the new period, the energy will start to express more in the direction of the new energy, and the old energy starts to fade away.
Right. So with this overlap, we are saying that the age of Aquarius, that is an age of revelation, right? Everything is being revealed, everything is open. And what's the energy of the previous age, the age of Pisces?
We could say that the Piscean era had an age where everything was very repressed, conservative. Um, when we think of it from a spiritual sense, which is what we're going to get more into in this talk, um, Pisces was a time of keeping things hidden and secret, allowing the population to move in the direction that it was going to, and then the select few who were privy to the knowledge, using this knowledge to really shepherd the world, we could say.
And we're talking about the mysteries or esoteric
Yeah, the
secrets.
esoteric mysteries. We could also say there's also a time of repression in the sense of sexuality, things like that, right? At the end of the age of Aries, a lot of the religions had degenerated into over sexuality. You think of like the Bacchanalia in Rome and things like that. So Pisces, obviously, there was a reaction to that. An unconscious reaction always moves from one pole to the other. So we see that there was a lot of moves towards celibacy, things like that, repressing sexuality, and again, also keeping things hidden behind closed doors, even in that sense, and our own expression of ourselves.
Okay, so those are the energies, and then what's happening with this overlap? Like with the cusp and how Pisces is affecting Aquarius, Aquarius is affecting Pisces. Is that what we're experiencing now?
Yes. Well, the energy of age, right, will reflect in a certain way that spirituality needs to be expressed during that time, that works for the energies and works for the beings that are manifesting during that period, or the souls of the soul group. And what happens is when you have an energy that is usually the polar opposite, they tend to be opposite of each other. Like we said before, Pisces is also a more open era. Aries is very gung-ho and goes forward, right? There becomes this conflict between the two energies, especially spirituality. Usually during a time of change, during a time of forward thinking, spirituality comes back to the cusp in some way or another. That's usually when we could say at the beginning of a new age, an avatar comes, things of that nature. And there's a change to the way we perceive the spiritual movement. And we won't say it's actually a change to spirituality, because the base universal theme under everything always stays the same. But there's an update to how things are disseminated, to how things are expressed, so that it can transmit better to be received by the new group of souls and the new evolution of the race that is on the planet at that time.
I see. And I think it was important what you said about how the truth always stays the same. There's one universal thread that is continuously expressing in myriad different forms. However, it would be a little bit boring if it was always going to be exactly the same. So what we see is that as divinity is making expression, or as the one source is finding all of these different forms that it can arise within, the different cycles of energies, or these wheels of creation, are always emanating, always showing what kind of expression is coming into the current reality. So where we find ourselves now, we're in the age of Aquarius, and we've established that there is, of course, an effect on society, there's an effect on trends, and of course spirituality as well. what does this mean for the individual? The reason I bring this up is because it seems that there is certainly a message in this time around, particularly to do with esotericism and the occult, around tools and a change in tools. And there's a sense that that has something to do with it.
Well, let's get a little bit more into the spiritual aspect of why the spirit expresses in the way that it does in the era of Aquarius, as opposed to Pisces, and even in other eras. Like we said, these cycles. And the math, I mean, we can overlay math in various different sacred numbers of cycles that all have their own radiations and energies, right? If we look at a year, for example, right, we go through 4 seasons, which is just the 4 elements expressing in their totality. And then we also go through the zodiacal year, and we go through the pieces within those 4 elements that are also related to the 4 elements. And
so does that mean that when someone is traveling through a zodiacal year, those individual energies are affecting them in different ways?
Yes, in a year time, right? If we're moving through different periods, different months of the year have a different radiation on us as well, in a more micro sense. And the ages are in a more macro sense. We're talking about a cosmic radiation that's affecting the planet for a 2,000-year cycle. But absolutely, those same energies also affect us on a month-to-month basis when we're getting the energies from the houses or the stars, depending on if it's which modality you're using. I know that there's different systems that attribute the energy to actually where the constellations are, but some are more seasonal based and just based on the energies of the seasons. And really aren't really aligned with the stars anymore, because those stars aren't
I
really...
thought it was important to ask that, because a lot of people, when they hear the astrological signs being self-centered, they just immediately think, okay, but I'm an Aquarius, so it's all about me, and they don't see that it's actually a larger energy that's impacting the collective.
Yes. Usually in an esoteric sense, we tend to try to not focus too much on the natal chart. The most important aspect of our natal chart, I would say, rather than becoming identified with what is basically our programming. You could say that there's very good evidence, especially if you look into a more detailed system, like an Eastern system, like a Vedic chart, where, I mean, our DNA, our appearance is literally aligned with the stars at the time we were born, or the energies, and that's where we incarnate. And it is fascinating to look at. It's cool. It's like it's interesting how that works out. But it's as above, so below, and all of these things are just a manifestation. What happens is, in the traditional sense, how when people talk about astrology and they do the exact opposite of what the usefulness of the chart would be, which is they become identified with the chart. They usually use it as an excuse to act a certain type of way that is based on our karma and the personality that we have to work to detach from, rather than become identified with it. And even if we use it in a more conscious sense, in the sense of, okay, well, these are the things I need to work on, so I better start acting opposite of it, or in the sense of something, if we look at it, something more in depth, like human design, right? This is what I would act like if I was more awakened and connected to my being. But we do it in a mechanical way, like we fake it. Instead of actually awakening consciousness, we just start making programs that pretend that we're the way that we're supposed to be in our authentic character. Then that's still inauthentic. It's not actual awakening. So it's more along the lines, I would say, that the most useful thing with the natal chart would be similar to what we're talking about now. We're talking about, obviously, in the sense of the planet going around the zodiacal belt, those energies affect the entire collective. The collective essentially is the personality of the Earth, so therefore that is what's affecting the Earth on the yearly basis. But as far as for our specific natal chart, what can be useful is, depending on our natal chart, and we compare it to the transits that go through our chart, they may affect us differently based on our energies. And then similar idea, the same way we would work with the energies that come along with the the moving from month to month. We work with the energies that come from the planets transiting specific areas of our chart, if we're aware of them. But in the sense of what we're talking about more of it's a year for the being that is the solar system. So we could say from our perspective, what we would say is the Godhead or God or the demiurge, right? The being that we're all a fractal of at some level or another, whether it's dormant in us and we have no perception of it and we're walking around being a person who's still just mechanically moving through the system, or if we're actually starting to awaken to this reality and feeling it, that being also is also going through a zodiacal year, and we can compare it to actually the descent of the spirit then, because that being represents spirit to us. It's not spirit, there's a center of the galaxy, there's a center of the universe, but for all intents and purposes, since we're within this construct, and to get out of this construct would become one with that being, because it's a layer within a layer. For us, it's the unity of all that we can perceive. There, outside of, you can see there's other galaxies and other dot in the sky. But
so, say again, what is the definition of spirit for this discussion?
The sun, or the entire being of the solar system itself, like the atom Kadmon.
Okay.
Our solar system is called Ors, by the way, and that we're the seventh solar system, the furthest away from the central star Alcyone, and orbiting it. And in that sense, then when we look at it like that, what we could relate these energies to, for example, in the ages, is the actual descent and the progress of that being. So just like we could see our own progress through a chain of the zodiac and a move in a zodiacal year, where we go through certain energies where we move forward, some energies we need to pull back, some energies we take leaps. Those energies affect the planet. And we talked earlier the relationship with Leo and Aquarius, Leo being basically that, we could say symbolically representing being one with the Father, but for our solar system. In an energetical sense, not actually all the way back, but that why there's major changes at that point, why a civilization in the age of Leo would be very in tune with spirit, because there'd be a synergy or a coherence with that radiation of the Father, or the closest you can be to that, right? The radiation of the spirit. And then we talk about Aquarius as after we have descend down from that, and we've gone through periods of darkness, they're coming back around to, even though it's the point furthest away from that, coming back into coherence and into synchronicity with that radiation.
So what exactly is this descent?
So we could say that just like we go through life and then we're born and we develop a personality and then we move through unconsciousness and then eventually we come to a time of awakening, and then we end up, then growing from that period, that the solar system goes through the same things, and this is reflected in the civilizations and the people and the population that lives on the planet, and the animals and all of these things, because they're a reflection of the Earth's personality, of the Earth as a being. So when we look at the energy of Pisces and we start to look at truly what that energy means for the narrative of what's going on in the cycle, is that Pisces is a dual sign. That's the end of the zodiac. And we could think of, when we go through cycles in a karmic way, a karma dharma way, that when we come around a cycle and we haven't raised our level of being, or we're still unconscious, then we don't awaken when we're supposed to awaken, and then we come back, and when we return to the end of the next cycle, let's say it's a year, let's say we went out and it was in Aries in the spring, and we had a lesson we were supposed to learn in our psychology, and we didn't learn that lesson. Then when we come back around to Pisces again, we're still in the same position, we're still just asleep, and now we have to repeat the lesson again. And in the sense of if we had gone out on a hero's journey, we had started awakening.
Gone out on a hero's journey.
Yeah, and started awakening in Aries, then when we would come back around to Pisces the next year, we would have raised the level of being and grown into a higher level of consciousness. So, first and foremost, when we look at what that means for Pisces to the planet itself, the energy of Pisces represents basically the Earth, which hasn't awakened. It's going through its own awakened journey. It's been born, and it's been going through its life as a not awakened being. That Pisces, in this sense, represents the bottoming out of the unconsciousness. So where spirit has descended about as far as it can into matter. Because coming back around in the Age of Aquarius, the next age over, where the waters are revealed, the waters of spirit are revealed again, is when the spirit returns back to its awareness. And we could say that the planet itself, because it hadn't been awakened when it came around that period, instead of preparing for its awakening, had to go through a dark age. We went through a dark age, Kali Yuga, and go through the suffering of a dark night of the soul, we could say.
Which we're still in the Kali Yuga.
Yeah. But I'm trying to relate it to experience maybe someone else has had, right? Right before your awakening, you go through a dark night of the soul with a lot of pain and suffering. And that's really what Pisces, due to the circumstances on this planet, because of course both signs can always express in two ways, although we would say that only now are we starting to see the bifocal aspect of it, as the Earth is starting to now come back up and regain consciousness. Before that, we could say they were all expressing perhaps the negative qualities, in the sense of there was only unconsciousness. The planet was completely unconscious itself, the collective. So it was descending and moving more downwards and not expressing really the ideals upwards. But this was intentional, because there was a descent. So we could say that the last time that the spirit expressed on this planet actually was back in the age of Taurus, which is about, I don't know, like 3000 BC. And this would have been right before, much of our recorded history. I mean, we know that civilization existed before that. But it seems that a lot of the things intentionally perhaps were removed so that the population could go through its own experience and growth. And in a sense of...
So as in... particular aspects of the mysteries and support from higher beings was taken off planet for a period.
Yes. In an esoteric sense, we could say that the beings that shepherded in this race of humanity, that the survivors from Atlantis, or maybe some people would like to say extraterrestrials, maybe they're one and the same really, because the spirit originally, before it started to interface with the physical vehicles on this planet, when they reach a stage of evolution, well, they would have had to come. It came from off planet first, before the local fauna evolved to a point where they could receive and interface with that consciousness, right? Because there's a development of matter as well, and we could say that's where Darwinism meets the esoteric sense, or the evolution of the spirit, or the wheel of ascension and descension, right? And in that sense, where's the missing link? The link is that the beings that were already connected at a certain point, becoming aware that there is now life able to receive the spirit, facilitate this transfer from the higher beings into the beings of the planet. And then at some point, they need to be left alone to grow and learn on their own, just like we all need to learn on our own and reach a point where we awaken on our own merit, not because someone gave us.
So the suggestion is that the missing link was the point when our consciousness was kick-started by some external intervention, and then now it's going to be a long time for us to develop to reach a point when what?
Well, let's not jump ahead of the gun there. What I meant to say, though, is that the last time that the true initiates, or the beings that were connected to spirit, the prior humanities that were shepherding us too, were really incarnated on this planet, was in the age of Taurus. And at that point, they were starting to pull back. You could say that the earlier humanities on this planet, like Atlantis and Lemuria, were hybridized with these beings from off planets. Whether you want to call them angels, you want to call them aliens, it's
Or
not
higher
really relevant.
dimensional beings.
Yeah, but higher dimensional beings, and they had higher spiritual faculties, and then through either interbreeding or genetic manipulation, whatever, they worked with the local fauna who were developing on their own to a place where they could start to develop faculties that could receive consciousness and start to perceive. And they brought the race up to a certain point where the race was starting to at least develop the early aspects of developing the soul, and then they left them to their own. And the thing is that the development of the physical body is not just our physical body. We could actually say that the physical body, where it's at, even at that point, had already reached its maximum capacity. But that's not actually the highest form of matter that we consider, because the higher ego of the soul is also a higher subtle forms of matter that we don't perceive. But that also needs to be developed as well before spirit can interface with the lower person. So it has to be able to interface both with the middle aspect and the bottom aspect. So
the soul and the physical vehicle.
So when the initiates left the schools, the esoteric mystic schools, to the locals who had at least reached the level of becoming like a neophyte, had started to develop maybe like the psychic abilities, clairvoyance, clairaudience, things like that, they still yet weren't necessarily a full understanding of being able to actually comprehend and interface with the spirit, but they were at a high enough level where they could be given the reins to work on their own and live through their experiences and all the experiences that it takes to go through before getting to that. And that would have been at the end of the age of Taurus, which is ruled by Venus. We've talked about Venus in general, in the sense of Venus as the symbol of the spirit itself, that there's 7 planetary rays, but one of them is the actual recapitulation of the array of creation that comes from source, and the other 6 are then created out of that, which gives us 7 rays. And
so one ray creates 6 as it splits.
And esoterically, Venus is the ray of love, which in the higher aspect in our soul is our experience of what the creative life force is, the spirit that animates all of us. We experience that as the feeling of love in the superior emotions. And if we think about what the other 6 rays are, which we don't need to rattle off at this moment, but they're all aspects of love. So with some intuition, even though maybe the esoteric texts don't necessarily give this specifically directly, they just say that one ray begets 6 more. With a little bit of intuition, we can understand that it is love that radiates more love and other aspects of love, other types of way to love. For example, like family, abundance and care and giving, things like that. Faith. And these types of things, creativity, beauty. So, in that sense, symbolic of that, Venus gives way to Aries, and a Martian era, and there was a transitional phase there, and we could say that the initiates at that point left the planet, and scuttled some of the technologies that they had in the past and some of the mysteries. Like they left some things orally, but they took away the
some key devices,
some key things that would have been dangerous in the hand of underdeveloped beings that still had a lot of ego. Let's leave it at that. Now, what Pisces then signifies is that at first, when we were left alone through Aries, like we have just said, there was still a lot of the lower ego and this animal ego, and man didn't necessarily start progressing forward. And they move through the era of Aries, and society's not doing really good at that time. So at the beginning of the age of Pisces, for the first time since the beginning of Age of Aries, the last avatar, a being of spirit incarnates on the planet with the new teaching for the time period. And
Who was that?
We say Jesus.
Okay.
Yes. I mean, truly an avatar is actually, I'd say, the message rather than an individual being. Because what you'll see is all of the religions that started in the Piscean energy have that energy of the teaching of Pisces. But we could say that the poster child for,
It was one of the great initiates of that time.
Is Jesus, yes. And also, the symbol of the cross is really the symbol of the energy of the age of Pisces. But either way, in that sense, and we could say that esoterically speaking, Jesus acted out in the physical the drama or the passion of what we have to do internally to find ourselves and to start to awaken. But this was acted out in the physical along with the help of his apostles and things like that. And he came down and we were left with this teaching of sacrifice. But the problem is that due to the state of the psychology on the planet, that almost immediately after Jesus disincarnated, within like 50 to 100 years, the teaching was almost immediately inverted. Because this idea of what sacrifice is and how it's permeated through the age of Pisces, and like I said, it's not just necessarily Christianity. If we think about like Mahayana Buddhism, which is a Buddhism that came around more in the last age and stuff, there's this really heavy energy on service and sacrifice for others and all of this, which is not of course, it's not a negative thing, but the work is internal and it's not supposed to be externalized and external first. And what gets lost in the idea of this having to sacrifice for others and being obedient to these external sources and the guru system is another thing that came up for the age of Pisces. Was all about going into submission, but also like going into the into the boonies of like somewhere in like Tibet and trying to find a secret school and knock on the door because everything was hidden
and then being
secret.
hazed at the door of the mystery school and being made to wait in the rain for 6 months and all these kinds of things. So that the aspect of sacrifice was certainly turned into something quite extreme and almost we could say negative in a way. Like you think of the master who says, okay, you have to scrub the floors for 30 years and then I'll tell you one secret or something like that.
Yeah, but this idea that sacrifice is for others is truly a lower understanding of the teaching from those who had yet to really truly experience the unity consciousness. First of all, how could objectively there is no other, there is no separation. If we were to connect to spirit, we have to experience the unity of all. And nothing at the same time, to be honest. Both of those poles. It's neither all or nothing, but rather just to exist and be in the moment, which is in some of the teachings. But the way to get there, it doesn't quite really line up with this idea. Because we could say that sacrifice is one of the factors or one of the attributes that we have to work with reality. We talked about the three forces of creation, and truly the work is being in the moment and then understanding how to work with the three forces at all times to achieve whatever is the goal we are, whether it's awaken or doing something else for the ego. That's just, it's more of the rules of how the reality works. And in the Gnostic teachings, we say that there's three factors to awakening the consciousness, which are death, birth, and sacrifice. And that's how we work with these energies when we're trying to transform the lower ego into the higher ego, to kill the ego, the lower ego, and create solar bodies, and to prepare our body to receive more consciousness from above. So it's appropriate for that method, but really it is still just working with these three aspects. And when we look deeper into what these aspects are, well, we say, for example, the first factor is death, right? Death of the ego, something that scares a lot of New Age people. Of course, if we go look back at ancient Hinduism, right, and we look at the goddess Kali, who is the goddess of death, right? She's also the goddess of rebirth. the word death only scares the ego because the ego doesn't comprehend that there is no actual death. So this is a trick of the mind to scare us, right? Because the ego can't be killed, and it is true in a macro sense, right? It's like the left-handed idea of that the abyss is actually the pralaya or going back to spirit. There's no perception at that end either. We are the life and the perception that exists between matter and spirit, and the force of matter in a theosophical sense is ego with a big E. So
the big self.
The big self.
Brahma.
But everything, right, as we move, energy moves. What we're talking about right now, we're talking about entropy, as the energy always has to move. There's always a transformation of the force of matter because matter is the illusion. So as we move from one point or to another, energy is not created or destroyed, but it is transformed. And to an extent, we always do leave something behind. Even when a star goes supernova, it leaves something behind. A planet dies, it leaves behind a dead moon, right? At higher levels of consciousness, something gets left behind, and then eventually it dissolves and disintegrates. We could say for our body, when we pass away, the soul moves on, the physical body decomposes, and then that energy then gets recycled again at its layer.
I think a good analogy would be like moving house, though. You know, if you have to move from one house to another house, you leave the old house behind, but you're still going somewhere. Yeah. You're still residing in a new location.
Yes. So in that sense, sure, the lower ego dies, but the ego also doesn't die because it's the phoenix bird rising, right? The bird is born out of the ashes. You burned the old, and then the new comes out. There's still a birth. But in that sense, right, the aspect of death and working with what we would say is the first factor is the perception or our perception of where we are in space. So we're going to talk about the cross a little bit in a second. We could say that the cross itself is a symbol of the matrix or a predicament right now, where the vertical line is a representation of space and the horizontal line is time. So you have space-time, basically the matrix, right? And our perspective in space on that vertical line, this is in the present moment, so not related to time, is directly related to our perspective in space based on our frequency. Right. So if our perspective's at a higher frequency, we'll be higher up that line, and our perspective is a lower frequency. And we can actually change our perspective and our by choice. Like we, of course, in the idea that we want to move upwards, we say death, right? But let's say someone wanted to become a black magician, or well, they probably don't want to become a black magician, but let's say they wanted to use this aspect of the reality to gain power for themselves for whatever reason they convince themselves to. They would move down that line, right? But they would still be working with the same principle. They would actually strengthen the aspect of themselves that resonates at a lower frequency, and they would actually be able to move to a different perspective point in space, further away from the middle, but also in a different direction. Now, the second factor is a factor that we call birth. In this sense, it's literally about using the force of creation. It's pretty self-explanatory. We need to use the creative energy to create. When we use the creative energy in a positive way, in the sense of an aspect of creation, then we create something new. So something is born in that sense. And then the third factor is sacrifice. And this is the one that everyone says, oh, it's a sacrifice for others and to get dharma and all of these things. But what we really need to understand is, what is sacrifice truly? It is actually the opposite pole of birth. So if we could say our perspective point is a conciliatory force, where we see from is just that's being in the middle. That's our point where we be, is the conciliatory force. So then the positive and the negative, well, obviously creation is the positive. The negative is the destructive force. Shiva is the creator and the destroyer. And in that sense, when we start to understand what sacrifice is, it's not necessarily something like that you do externally.
Self-martyring.
I mean, it is literally sacrificing something, destroying something to extract the energy that's within. This is why the ancients, for example, did it in an external way. They would sacrifice animals to the gods, right? In a sense of us working towards to become more conscious. We use sacrifice in the sense of we sacrifice the beings we created inside, or the aggregates we created inside our egos. And when we destroy one structure, we release the energy inside to move up to and be thus transmuted to a higher aspect, or a higher layer of the reality, a higher subtle form of matter. But we're using the destructive force to recapture the energy aside so that we can mold it into something else through the force of creation. So in that sense, that's truly what sacrifice is. And what we could say that the sacrifice truly meant in the teachings of, say, the Christ, is that Jesus on the cross represents the exact energy of what was going on at the beginning of the age of Pisces. And that Jesus himself is divinity, he is the spirit. And that the spirit came all the way down into matter to sacrifice itself to re-spiritualize that matter. Because the matter is asleep, it's the furthest off the way. So for a spirit to descend all the way to the bottom of matter, we could say that spirit dies. We talked about how the perception in life itself exists between matter and spirit. So spirit creates matter, and then it descends into it to bring that matter back. Because the matter is basically dead, it doesn't perceive. But also spirit, all the way at the top point, is also, we could say matter dies when we're at unity. So there's still no perception. So it's this constant cycle of ascending and descending and going through these cycles. And what the point of the cycle for Pisces, and with the energy of the religions of the Piscean era, are completely about being coming to the bottom of that cycle, and like we said, like a dark night of the soul, and signaling the reverse at the bottom point of the cycle, and the beginning of that period where we start to raise up and start to return towards source.
That's very interesting, because there is a teaching in esotericism that a long time ago in a previous humanities, when spirit was descending, then it was good to want to descend, right? That was what God wanted to do. So the pentagram in the temples used to be inverted, and at that time everyone was more conscious, and they were trying to go down to become more material, more dense, so that divinity could go on its journey down to the bottom. So all of their worship, all of their practices and everything was to try to become heavier, to become more dense, and to hit the lowest point. And now that we are in this energy of going back up, then it's very natural that you have many people that are all saying, I want to find God, I want to be spiritual. Even unconsciously, they're responding to this energy. And whether you're in the mysteries and the studies and practices, and you're aspiring to awaken, to raise your level of being, or you're the average person in the general population and you think, oh, I should meditate, or I should get a meditation app. Everyone is following this flow to a certain extent, but are we fully following it? Or could we say that a lot of people or groups are perhaps maybe not quite?
Well, what you tend to see happens, and we could go back to an example from a biblical story that everybody would be pretty familiar with, which is a good example about how the symbols and the energies need to change, and some will still be attached to it and won't be able to move forward. We could say that during each zodiacal age, certain groups are born because they have to learn certain types of have certain type of karma, certain types of things to learn, and they're through that age they're supposed to have some type of progress. And if they don't have progress, then at the end of the age they will struggle to move into the next period, and maybe
then what happens to them?
They will have to go through the cycle again and start over. Like how we said, if you get to Pisces, your own personal Pisces, so the being who came around your path, and you get your own personal Pisces and you haven't raised the level of being, then you just have to repeat the cycle. It's not like we could think of it as like failing, which a lot of people like to look at themselves as when they do bad whenever. And this could be attributed even to, our regular trials that are in a day of just facing our own karmic recurrences. And then they beat themselves up over it and actually make it worse, because then you create more problems down the line. But usually if we're in observation and we come to something and we still haven't quite comprehended how to move past it, then what happens, whether it's a mini cycle, like it's every time your friend comes around you have an argument, or it's on the journey of the soul and you didn't get what you were supposed to for the astrological age, what happens is you just simply will repeat the cycle in the next age. But still, there is, like, at the end of an age, there's usually this pull from both sides, right, to both the prior generation and the new generation. Sorry to correct that. To be in spirituality is usually a spiritual movement, because both the ones at the end of the last stage are like, oh, I need to finish now, or I'm screwed, and the ones that are coming into shepherd in the new age are coming into shepherd in that new energy and diffuse it. And then basically what happens to the ones that are at the end, they either get with the program or they end up not able to let go of their attachments to the old methods, and thus struggle with the new energy and to progress.
And then they won't go forward, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm. And a good example of this is, we could say, when we look in the Exodus with Moses, right? We could say that Moses was an avatar at the beginning of the Age of Aries. So maybe the last initiate, right, before the humanity was left to itself, or this humanity, because
there were
there are other humanities, yeah. And basically, they were coming out of the Age of Taurus, right? This is signified a little bit later in the story, but they're moving into the Age of Aries. And if we remember what the plagues of the pharaohs, and they took the firstborn son, if you remember, the Israelites, to show that they were along with the new energy of Aries and to be spared, they put lamb's blood on the door of each of the houses, right, so that their firstborn wouldn't be killed. This is a symbol of the fact that they're disciples of the new energy of the avatar of Aries. So
they were following some of the new symbols? Yes.
So they were like Moses' followers.
Right.
Right.
They also ate lamb, right, in their Passover?
Yes, I think it was lamb and lamb's blood for their version of the Eucharist, but that's another thing that we'll talk about in a second. Then what happens is, as they're on the Exodus and they're moving, and now they've finally left Egypt, right? Moses eventually goes to Mount Sinai to get the Ten Commandments, basically the new teaching of the Age of Aries, because there's always, like I said, a new teaching. It's repackaged, we could say.
Same truth, but
same truth in a different expression. And when Moses comes back, what does he find? That some of the people that have been following him are now, they kind of gave up on it, and they're worshiping a golden calf. And a calf, being like the bull or Taurus, is a representation of the Age of Taurus. So they were kind of sort of moving with the wave, but not able to make it there. So they came back regressed back to what they were attached to, and weren't able to truly understand the teachings moving forward. And that's what we see, now. We fast forward to now, is that in a lot of the movements, we have these New Age movements, we have these esoteric movements, is that what tends to happen is there's an attachment to this energy of Pisces, whether that's a subtle attachment to Christianity, which, even though, say, mystery schools might say that, it's a universal thread, all schools of thought are even, all the religions are even, there's maybe an unconscious attachment and still highlighting of a Christian element, for example. And then that's just one example. We could even look at a not religious, really as religious movement. Look at something like New Age, and you see this like attachment to like meta and just like peace and love, this like toxic positivity. It's all about, I'm just gonna give good vibrations to other people, and it's all that means I don't have to do any work on myself. I'm awakened and spiritual because I'm radiating love to everyone. Which, of course, we want to radiate love to everyone, but that's a natural expression of actually becoming spirit within, that your energy will radiate love, because spirit is actually beyond love. it is love is a type of expression of the spirit, but at the highest subtle level, it is life itself. And when we begin to connect to life itself, we inherently, our vibration will radiate these things, and people can feel this from internally from us.
So it's another version of faking it then, to just say I'll only radiate love and not do any inner work or not have any other kind of practice.
Well, yeah, it's a very big.
It's like a bypassing.
It's a very big, I think, struggle with this. Not just with this culture, and we have a culture that's very obviously it's been very egotistical, but then also like the programming that we've been ingrained. Like we said, pretty much all the teachings in Pisces are inverted. We think of inverted as only being like worshiping Satan, but really Satan is external ego, it's external method, it's external dogma, right? So all of these like very rigid rules and systems are actually Luciferic. The thing is that it was right for the time, because at the time humanity was at its low point. So those methods, those strategies were needed to develop the man who still hadn't yet developed the soul to even the highest level, to receive spirit and to get them started in these schools and to continue the evolution to a point where we reach to now, where the water bearer comes about and reveals the spirit. And now we could say that pretty much, even though there's a ton of unconsciousness on this planet and probably a majority of the people won't do the work, that every vehicle per se, every person on this planet has, at least in the physical matter wise sense, both in body and soul, evolved to a point that if they were to do the work, they could receive the spirit, which would not have been the case. If we go back to the Age of Taurus, we could say there were still basically two species of man. You had the ones that were still more Atlantean and the ones that were still more of the what we call the Aryan race, which is not a Nazi thing, but actually the name of all humans on the planet. And at the time, those who were of the Aryan race haven't developed the centers far enough to receive spirit through the crown, right? So, and in the same token, we could say that the Atlanteans were more spiritual beings that couldn't actually deal with having the dense physical energies as much. So, we could say that our physical bodies are very, very highly adept. It's at the top form of matter, at the highest you can go with matter without doing the work to connect to the spirit. But now the teaching needs to be to actually connect to that unmanifested divine purpose that's behind everything, and to realize that we are life itself. We're not the vehicles that we inhabit. We could say that, with all the scares around artificial intelligence nowadays, which, by the way, in itself is an unconscious reflection of the feeling that we need to create something, just like we were created by the beings above us and they were created by the beings above them, whatever. And basically, the only reason our AI can't become conscious is because we don't understand consciousness at our level. We're at the lowest level. But we could say that our ego, so us, our soul, right, already created an AI that it can interface up from a higher level, and it itself is AI that another higher level can interface from. Because that's what the ego is. Matter is. We create a form of matter, and
this
then
is the AI.
Yeah, and the matter, the subtle things within the matter, are the AI, and then we fractalize the spirit fractalizes and goes into each and every one of them, so that it can have expression, and it can experience. Because at one, there's also no perception, because you're everything, but also nothing, and there's nothing there. There's nothing to do, which is why the cycle continues. But at that point, that's where we're at. That the spirit is now returning. There are accounts of things like star seeds or sons of wisdom, sons of God, all of these types of aspects. And these are beings that are being born now for the first time since either the Age of Taurus, maybe even before that. Maybe they hadn't incarnated on the planet before. Because this is a time period that's very important. Always between every astrological age, there is a transition and things change, and the the story progresses, but specifically at this time, because the earth itself is going through its dark night of the soul, which means that shortly, soon, the earth will have its awakening moment as a being itself, which means there'll be a drastic leap in the consciousness of the planet. Everybody's always worried about, well, we're going to do the planet, we're going to destroy the planet. The earth will be fine. But if we're not able to at least align ourselves with the direction of the consciousness of the planet moving forward, then we will not be able to survive that transition and that change. And I'm not talking about necessarily even in a cataclysmic sense. Sure, there may eventually be reflections of natural disasters and things like that. But I mean more in the sense of the ego consciousness. Remember, the ego consciousness is a reflection. So if the earth is burning off its ego consciousness, everyone who is still stuck in ego and a reflection of that, she could, be thrown into mental disorder and things like that.
We already see that mental health
mental
is
health
at
is
an
at an all-time
high.
Yeah.
And that's just the start of it, right? The more that the ego spirals, then it has the capacity to get fully out of control. And when people are fully at their height of unconsciousness, then they tend to be very destructive.
Yeah, and then we become our
irrational.
we become our own worst enemy. Way before you have to worry about an asteroid or a planet or all of the fun theories of mass destruction. Way before that, and this is true for any of the races esoterically, they would say that there was way before the flood. For example, in Atlantis times, there was wars and other things, and people were harming each other more than the final nail in the coffin or something. So, in that sense, right, it's a very important time to make sure to move with the cut and get with the energies of Aquarius. And in that sense, there's a few things. So we go back to the idea of what we were saying about why the tools are stopping to work. Well, the tools of the initiatic schools have been on this planet. And we could go, pretty much every tool that you could possibly think of really is a tool of the initiatic schools. Whether it's the New Age things, people like New Age, like psychedelics or meditation or all of these types of things, right? That they... Well, not necessarily meditation by itself, but like the mantras that we use in meditation and things like that. All of these things were held in secret in these schools, and that those who were of a higher level of consciousness of population would then give it meaning as co-creators when everyone else is unconscious, and by keeping it out of the eyes of those who didn't understand, they were able to give power to these things throughout the reality. Now, coming into this period now as a return towards spirit is the return of spirit as opposed to the soul schools is the move past one, like we said, method and external religion to get us to the source, but it's also in that sense to finding the true religion, the religare, the spirit within, requires us to also comprehend that we are the tool. The human being is the tool. So we say a sword has a value for diffusing the energy of fire. That's because a few of us that were a little bit more conscious than us all got together, and in secret we decided that this sword relates to the energy of fire. We all put our focus on it. Our force is stronger than the regular population. And now, because we agree that in unison, the sword has a power of fire. Mm-hmm. But truly, we have the ability to project fire without a sword. We have the ability to control the elements around because the external is the internal. So if we learn to control the elements within, and then eventually we start to become coherent and in alignment with the external reality out, when we become God, we become reality itself, then we can control fire around us, we can control air around us without necessarily needing to use a medium that we agreed has power, because we don't comprehend that we actually are what is giving it power.
So I can see a lot of people in the occult jumping up and down immediately to defend, say, a tool like the sword, the mantram, the tarot, whatever. And their first thing they're going to say is, no, you don't understand. maybe I've seen it clairvoyantly, there's fire, it's so powerful, we can ward off demons or do an exorcism or something very dramatic and exciting. Don't you know, I have all this experience, this is what I've seen, this is what my gnosis, my experience has been. How could you say that
Yeah,
about a sword?
look, there's nothing wrong with that, and the tools still work. If the tools work for you, you can use a tool, but you need to understand that we need to start to understand that we are the tool, because the tools are going to stop working. Inherently, the tools work the best because they were secret, and because they were secret amongst those of us that were more gifted with consciousness in the population. But now, with the energies of Aquarius, with the information being leaked everywhere, like between the internet and just also the fact that the call internally from beings of spirit is to be more forthcoming and to reveal this information. This information reveal started before Age of Aquarius started, all the way back with in the 1800s. And even though things were still a little bit hermetic there, certainly once we reached the Age of Aquarius in 1962, the floodgates opened and all the secrets are out there, sometimes without context. And that is actually what makes them lose power more, because you have people without context viewing these things and putting their awareness points onto it that don't understand how it works. And of course, putting their skeptical energy on it. And, oh, how could this be true? And that, in a grand scale, because it's now becoming more aware in the collective of these things, the more awareness is on it and the more awareness of those who don't understand the truth of the mysteries, then the tools actually, and you may even notice it in your practice, they start to not work as well. They still work. You are still the tool. So if you resonate with it, it'll still work for you. But it is starting to lose its energy. Whether that's, like I said, it's a ritual, whether it's the plant medicines, whether it's hypnosis,
or
all of these
even
things.
certain mantras. I remember when I used to use a mantra like Raum Gam or Fa on for astral projection and for dream recall. If I go back 10, 15 years ago, they were so powerful, it felt the whole room was shaking. And now it's not the same.
Yes, and it is exactly like this. So that's one thing that we have to understand. And then two is also, like we said, that the main energy of Aquarius is the internalization, the union within with our own unique frequency. And the union with something that they say a lot in New Age, our true north, or our North Star, right? Our center, our own center point, right? Because north, as we said, is the location of where the spiritual energy is projecting from. And just like the center of the universe or our solar system is projecting energy, we too have an essence and our own small divine fractal within us. Everyone has their own unique hadith, their own unique perspective point. And that we could say is our North Star, because it is where we project our little bit of fire that comes out of us, that comes forward from us. And it's interesting because we talk about how symbols have to change. And this is something I actually didn't even realize at the time when I was moving towards really reflecting on these things. But the use of North Star has been there quite a bit, and we've been moving towards both Venusian symbols, because we feel called from Venus, from the spirit, but also towards more ancient symbols that are more neutral. Because in a sense, all the symbols are packets of data and they're all the same, and their meaning is only what we give to them. So ancient symbols that maybe people no longer have attachments to from eras gone by are now neutral. They wouldn't have been at the time. Say if we wanted to use the Sumerian symbol in the time of Aries, it probably would not have been neutral because there were still active religions using that. But right now, like I said, the cross inherently, for example, is a symbol of both of spirit descending all the way into matter, and then also just the matrix. But in today's day and age, because of the programming, because of what we have, it's one of the most polarizing symbols, right? It's not neutral at all. Either you really, really like it or you really, really don't.
But not just that. If you go online, you'll see a lot of those who, I don't believe they're initiated into the mysteries, but they've done some occult study, and they're immediately calling out the cross and the black cube and Saturn, and using that connection to say that this means that esotericism is evil and scary and it's going to capture you and all these things. So we can see that there's such a big reaction.
It's either there's a reaction one way or the other, which can be a challenge then for us to then find our center and to find balance. Of course, once you're at balance, it doesn't matter. Any symbol wouldn't have much of an effect on you, and you would understand what they all meant at the point of being born again or awakening. But as far as in a dissemination and as a tool for that, we were trying to find something more neutral to reflect the energy of the era, and also just the energy of Aquarius. And through the connection to Venus, a symbol was divined to me that comes from ancient Sumeria, and it is actually related to the goddess who was a ruler of Venus in Sumeria, but the goddess Inanna, who we could say is the precursor to all of the female Greek deities that came later, and the Egyptian and that sort. We could say Inanna is kind of a combination of Aphrodite, Athena, Artemis, Hera, and Demeter all in one. There's all the traits of all that. Like she's both a goddess of war, and the goddess of with the animals and the lions. So like Artemis, she's the goddess of war, like Athena, and wisdom, like Athena, and then also the goddess of love and marriage as Aphrodite. And she rules Venus, right? The Sumerian pantheon had only 7 deities rather than 12, probably a reflection from it being from a more ancient time before we had descended into the aspect of
further density.
A further density where we now have 12 forces. The 7 is related to the level of our soul. And also when we look at the Sumerian myths too, we'll see that whereas later on in the same myths that are recapitulated into Greek or Egyptian, for example, the main character of the story is a hero or like a half god, half man, very symbolic of what initiate is. When you go to the original stories that these archetypes pull from, in the Sumerian myth, the myths that are almost exactly the same, it's a god actually, it's a full god that is actually going on the hero's journey that we think of as a hero trying to become a god. Like they're already a god and they're just,
having a journey,
trying to take over the universe. But it shows just like a different layer of the reality symbolically. But Inanna has this famous myth. It's very similar to the myth of Persephone, if you are aware of Greek mythology. But it's called Inanna's Descent, and it's where Inanna, who's the daughter of An representing the heavens, and the heir apparent to An. So she descends down into the underworld, or our reality, right, to conquer the underworld and unite it with the heavens. So basically, literally, the spirit descending to matter. You could say she is our essence, the part of the energy that comes down into the matter to conquer it. And at the bottom, she dies for 3 days, and then eventually is resurrected and comes back up, all the way back up, but now master of both worlds. Exactly the cycle that we're talking about. And in that sense, we could also think of, when we think of to the Greek mythology, that this is in relation to the ascended female aspect of spirit, or Aphrodite Urania, which is Aphrodite married to Uranus, or Inanna to An. So the completion of the work. Actually, also, when you look at the Titanomachy, that also shows how that Aphrodite was cleaved from Uranus through Saturn, who is Cronus.
Time.
Yes, time, material, Satan, right? So he castrates Uranus, thus his creative energy falls into the physical, and Aphrodite is born from the waters. And then, of course, she has to return back up to becoming Aphrodite, Urania. So all the same symbols. But the symbol that was most associated with Inanna, or later Ishtar, which is the Babylonian, was the star of Inanna, or the 8-pointed star, which when we think of, we talked about the number of 7 relating to the middle, or the octave, is the number 8 in a musical scale, if we go from the first note to the eighth note, we have now reached a higher level of the same note. Right?
Or completed a journey.
Completed the journey,
octave.
completed the octave, raised the level of being. So already that 8 is a symbol of the completion of the work and the reuniting of spirit, the descent of Inanna into the underworld, and then the return back. What was interesting was I went to order this pendant, and
that had the star.
That had the star of Inanna, right? The star of Venus, with our connection to Venus. And I didn't know this at the time, but apparently in modern times, basically this symbol, this 8-pointed star, is called the North Star. So I thought, and actually even at that time, I still hadn't realized it yet. I actually went to a lecture with another teacher, a New Age teacher, and they was talking about finding your center and finding your North Star. And then it all clicked to me, and I rushed up to him after the class, another friend, and I told him about it, and he was like, "Oh yeah, that's true. It is the star of Venus." And that's when I think it all kind of came through together. That like, well, because so many people have been seeing that, using that in a sense of the pointing to the direction of your inner essence, and then realizing that actually this is the modern symbol of that symbol from the past that was coming to me internally. I mean, there's a subtle difference in the modern representation. It's just the 8-pointed star. In the Sumerian star, which we have to get one made maybe, but the Sumerian star has a little bit more esotericism, that in the center of the star, so in the middle point, is actually the shape of the absolute that you might be familiar with.
The 3 concentric circles.
The 3 concentric circles that you may be familiar with from Kabbalah. Yeah.
We've posted that on our Instagram so people can see it there as well.
And we'll probably put it on like the flyer for this episode or something. But either way, a little bit extra symbolism. It's the same idea though. It's that the 8-pointed star is shaped exactly the same as the North Star. And we say that coincidences are never a coincidence because they don't actually exist. So we've been moving towards that symbol as a.
What does it represent? Does it represent
as
Christ?
a representation of the Age of Aquarius, which is the completion and the return to spirit, the religare, the union with God within, not the soul, like has been confused in the mystery schools for the last few, just because of the level of comprehension. But in the last few ages, all of the work has been towards building the soul, connecting to the higher self, or renouncing that soul because you don't trust it, if it's a left-handed teaching, right? But it's all still between the two poles of duality, the soul and the lower person. And the divinity, the consciousness, is the third force that's between them. And that's the spirit, where the word spirit has become synonymous with the soul, and like, especially the Western occult. This is not the case of what is actually the purpose of the.
So what is the Christ?
Well, there's a reason why everybody's confused. The Christ principle, or the Christos force, is the spirit. It is the star. But the Christ, as usually is referred to in most Western occultism, is usually the Glorion or the Shekinah, or the outermost point of the absolute. So we could say that the absolute, the 3 concentric circles, represent the even in the unmanifested, because everything is all together as one in the unmanifested. There's no manifestation, but everything is united in one. That there are layers, and that the inner circle is the spirit. The middle circle is related to the mind or the consciousness, but the divine I, right? What we call the demiurge. And then the outer circle is the shadow of the demiurge that is used to create the duality and to create the manifestation. And we could say that outer circle is related to the unity of everything, which is something that
like the world soul.
Yeah, like the world soul, or just unity at any level. But it's matter. It's the divine feminine, and the unity of everything, depending on where your level of comprehension is, could be the world soul. It could be the union of the solar system. But the thing is, the perception that I'm everything and I'm all of these.
And that's not the end of the
beings.
journey.
But the thing is that you're both everything and nothing. So if you see what you see a lot, for example, in left-handed path teachings, is they maybe realize that that's a trap, but then they flip to worshiping the other end of it, which is like the Buddhist emptiness, or that there's nothing. And now that's the truth.
And both of those are just two sides of a
Yeah.
dual view, right?
Because the reality is there's something, nothing. There's always the manifested, unmanifested, and that creates the perception. So it's both something and nothing at the same time.
And then would we say that the North Star or the Star Venus is a symbol of the highest Christ, the something nothing, or it's just Aquarius?
I would say that it's a symbol of the divine spirit and the completion, and the return to the unity with spirit. So if you want to call it the Christ principle, if you want to call that An, you want to call that Oranos, you want to call that
well, to me, it is
Ayin,
it is the Christ
Brahma,
in its
or
highest
Para
meaning.
Brahma, really.
Mm-hmm. The lower meaning is where the meaning of Christ has now moved down the tree of life because of the miscomprehension in the mystery schools and the age of darkness. So they've placed Christ at the level of Chokmah, or some we've even seen at the level of Atman, and it's just going down, lower and lower.
Yeah,
and that's why it's so confusing.
Not Atman, be Buddhi, but so it's at the level of Atman, but Atman's body. So it's like the piece of the.
So the reason I think I wanted to bring this up is because there's a practical part to this where a lot of those in occult studies, they may have a home altar that they do some practices with. Maybe that's where they sit and meditate or do their prayers. And you can find online from different Gnostic schools maybe some instruction on how to create a home altar, and there'll be the suggestion: put something for fire, put something for water, put a pentagram, put some candles, put some deities you connect with that represent different forces. And often they'll say, put a symbol of the Christ. And we've seen different opinions on this, where you have those that are very much caught up in dogma. They'll say, the symbol of Jesus on the cross is the only symbol that can be the symbol of Christ for your altar. Christ meaning the life force that you want to connect with, or the unity, the higher aspect that you want to connect with. And now, after this discussion, it seems appropriate that you could have the Star of Venus on your altar as this symbol, for example. What would you say about that?
Yeah, I mean, look, symbols are symbols, and you use whatever you want, really. To be fair, I just gave a reason why we settled ourselves personally on the Star of Venus, and also it seems to be a lot of others are feeling that symbol as well. But I mean, I think it's just more important to move away from the attachments and to evaluate if we have attachments. So, like, if you want to use an Ankh, for example, which is also another symbol of Venus, I don't think there's really that much of a difference between that or a Norse symbol or something like that. But we do have to evaluate our attachments to symbols that are related to the cultural programmings and the religious programmings that we grew up with. To an extent, a lot of our own aggregates are built on top of what we could call egoic memory. Karmic memory, yeah. That is related to the things that are built into the cultural collective ego consciousness, just from simply being born at this time and in a certain location and being raised like that. And then, of course, we then build egos on top of it over it. And we may not even be aware of these deeper unconscious roots until much later in the work. And if we're really, really blind to these traditional values and attachments, they can be what completely take us off the path earlier on. We talk about the biggest enemy to the consciousness is the ego of mystical pride and the spiritual ego. Well, it certainly is a spiritual ego to have an attachment or an aversion to a religious form. So it's realistically, I would say, in the sense of we tend to use all religious symbols, but we just try not to highlight some ones that are active over others that are active at this point. So, for example, we have Christian symbology, Buddhist symbology, Hindu symbology, all of that, but the centerpiece is something from Sumeria. and the centerpiece for our center and our school and the things that we use, because there is no one that's either from Sumeria or actively working with that. So the symbol is clean and it's new, and it's a new symbol moving forward for the new era. We also like the Ankh. I believe you have an Ankh on right now.
No,
you don't.
I often wear
Okay.
the Ankh.
Usually she has
Usually
an
I
Ankh on.
have an Ankh. I just didn't want to have too much going on today.
But the energy of Venus is Venus Urania. We talked about the planetary rule. Like the last time Spirit left, the Spirit left as Venus down in the matter, in the Earth sign of Taurus. And what is the planetary ruler of Aquarius? It is Uranus. So, all of these things are signs, and all of these things point to the direction that we're moving. And it's all a journey. It's finding within, finding Uranus and Uranus. Yeah.
I think this is a good place to come to the conclusion. Thank you for following along on this discussion with this new information that we know will be beneficial for those who are listening. The summary is that we always must be loyal to Source, and when new energies and change comes in, it is our attachments that can cause us to miss the mark or to miss the messages, the waves of divinity and its movements coming through. If we can shed these attachments, like Krishna said to Arjuna, abandon all attachment. If we can let go of the things within our programming and embrace the new age and its energies, then that will ultimately be the best support towards us finding more fulfillment, finding truth within, finding our center, finding our North Star. So remember to be the light, be the change you want to see.
Yes, remember the vibrator higher frequency and maximize Dharma for the collective. Love and light.
We'll see you soon.